feel like I should. Yeah, they change them every year. Good evening, everyone, and welcome to Just Ask Jen, our financial town hall. We wanted to welcome everybody. Today's topics is a little bit about the forecast and the district's revenues, and then a little bit of information about bonds and levies, and then we'll open it up for questions from the community or board members or people in the audience. So let me say that if you want to ask a question throughout it, you have the opportunity to do it through three ways. You can go to Blue Jeans and hit the hand icon, and then we'll put the chat put your question in the chat, and they'll ask for you. If you're on Facebook, you use the comments tool to send in your question, and if you're in the live audience, you may welcome down at the podium to talk to us. So if you'll flip to the next slide. I want to introduce my illustrious guests with me tonight. There we go. First, we have next to me Ms. Bolton. She's our finance chair and a board member for 16 years, I think you said, yes. And then over to the far right, my far left, is Mike Gustin, our assistant treasurer. And our resident expert on all this stuff is Kevin Ashley, our director of financial reporting transparency. I am Jen, the treasurer and CFO. And then online, we have two board members online of both of our finance committee. Mr. Brandon Craig is our vice president, and Dr. Kareem Moffitt. So welcome, everybody. So we'll just go ahead, and you want to say any opening comments? Okay. So we'll just we'll dive into the slides. I'll talk quickly. Just as a general reminder or an educational information for those who have not seen this before, this is a picture of all the funds that come into the district as revenues. The big blue pie chart is our general fund, our general operating fund. And then we have some state and federal grants. Those two yellow pie slices are the money that goes to our non-public auxiliary sites. The dark blue, or the little teal color one, is our food service. And then money that comes in specifically to pay off our bond levy money. And then we have a share of about $7.5 million of local grants. So, but you can see that the general fund is the largest, almost 60% of all of our funds, and it's usually a larger percent, but because of ESSER, it looks a little bit different. We have about $113 million in anticipated balances of all the ESSER funds. There's $113 million out of ESSER 3, but then we have some smaller grants that are related to homeless and early childhood and graduation pathways. So this year we're anticipating $864 million in revenues. And like I said, 596, almost 600 million is for operating expenses in the general fund. So next slide. So now we're going to dive into the general fund specifically, and where does the money come from to fund the general fund? And the largest portion of that source is local property taxes. So both local real estate and taxes that are on the public utility sites. That generates about $338 million this year. The next largest source is our state funding formula that generates about 165 to 66 billion. Some of it is restricted to specific topics like career tech, English language learners, students with disabilities, student wellness, and something else I'm forgetting, gifted maybe. And so then there's about $24 million included that is a reimbursement from the state on property tax credits for homestead and rollback. So that's about $23.5 million. And then all of our other revenue, $68 million, comes from the community reinvestment, the pilot payments, TIF payments, any tuition that we would collect, and any kind of reimbursements that we would receive from Medicaid or E-rate. Next slide. So this kind of gives you a historical and a forward view of the revenue trend. You can see in the first two columns, there's kind of a dip, and that represents the change in the state funding formula where they remove the pass-through funding for tuition for charter schools and voucher programs. But then in the next couple of years, you can see there's like a very modest increase, mostly related to enrollment projections, and then the change in the state funding formula where or the second version of the current formula, that they increased the funding because they only partially funded it the first 2 years. And so that we see from last year to this year a $20 million increase in revenues because of the phase-in formula and the update of the base costs, where they calculate how many teachers you might have for each grade, and they multiply times state average. They were using 2018 values, and they updated them to 22 average salaries. So that helped us a little bit this year. Going forward, you see a little bit of increases. We're anticipating return of enrollment and continued growth, and the continued phase-in of the formula, or the funding of the formula. And over to the right, the last two bars represents the levy that's coming up for renewal. It's the $48 million levy. It was first enacted in 2016, or it was voted in 2016. 5-year levy, and there's that's the one that has the $15 million set aside for the preschool expansion. So you can see in 2027, it's a half year of collections because property taxes are billed on a calendar year and we collect them on a fiscal year. So the first year it expires, we'll stop collecting in December 31 in 2026. So that's half of the fiscal year 27 year. And then in the next year, you'll see the full year of revenue. Okay, next slide. So switching sides of the income statement, we're going to look at expenditures. So this year's budget is 609.9. You can see from this slide that over 70% of our projected expenditures are based on personnel, so salaries and benefits. And then purchase services represents any kind of professional service that we would buy, transportation, technology services, coaching, instructional coaching, and then the smallest pie of all other the supplies, the debt payment. So that comes out of the general fund. There's about $16 million that comes out of the general fund to help make debt payments. And then any capital that we buy. So if we're buying technology, anything that has a useful life of over 5 years. And then, so next slide. So this is a summary of the forecast. So it's showing you, typically we show you 3 years of actuals and then the forward looking. But for this slide, we're just showing you the last year's actual. And you can see the dark bar represents a revenue and the light gray bar represents expenditures. So those are actuals. So we collected, we ended up spending more than we collected. And that was intentional on the board because we were investing in some strategic initiatives. And then for last year and for this year, and then the board is committed to going back to a more balanced approach where our budgets will not exceed our annual revenue estimates. And so you can see the yellow line represents our cash balance in the general fund, and you can see where it took a little bit of dip between 23 and 24, and then we're trying to even it out so that we maintain our cash balance to be good financial stewards. Otherwise, we would either have to come back to the public for new money, or ODE would join, or ODW now will join us and help us make our funding decisions. And so we would rather not give up that decision making. So next slide. So kind of switching over to levies now. This is a visual representation of the renewal cycle of our levies. So the green line represents the $65 million levy that was renewed last in 18, and we renewed it as a 10-year levy, so it doesn't come back up for renewal until 2028. The red line represents the other emergency levy, $52 million, and it comes up, it was renewed in 22, I think for the third time, and it doesn't come up for renewal until 32. But instead of being on the ballot 3 out of every 4 years, we're trying to spread that out to alleviate that stress on households. So the one that's coming up is the blue line, and that is a 5-year renewal levy. So the board, once it comes up and goes on the ballot for November 25, we'll have to make a decision about whether we want it to maintain as a 5-year or change it. Next slide. So these are the different types of levies that the district uses to help fund our operations. The first one is called a current expense levy. And this is typically what's used throughout the state of Ohio. Hamilton County is pretty unique in using the emergency levies, which is the second version. But back to the first one, it's so you either call it a regular operating levy or a current expense levy, and it's a fixed millage rate. So a mill is a measure of tax, and it's multiplied times your assessed value. So the board, when you go on the ballot, you tell them how many mills you want, and then the auditor calculates how many dollars that'll generate, and it changes. And you can have it up to 1 to 5 years, or make it a continuing, so it doesn't stop taxing the household until a vote to stop it happens. You can be used for daily operations, and it is subject to the 1976 House Bill 920, which is, they call it the reduction factor, which prevents property taxes, individual property taxes, from skyrocketing based on inflation. So they reduce the millage rate, collection rate, to maintain about the same dollar that the original levy collected, except for new construction. The emergency levy is also a time year levy, but you ask the voters to approve a fixed sum. So as you saw, we had three levies that were fixed sum levies. So no matter what happens with property values, we collect the same amount of money. That can be anywhere from a year up to 10 years and used for daily operations. And the House bill doesn't, reduction factor doesn't apply because we're still getting the same amount of money. The third is the bond levy that we approved 2003, I think. And that's a fixed sum levy, but they calculate the dollar values to make the debt payments on the bonds. So, and then it expires when the life of the building, when the project ends. And then there's a permanent improvement levy, which can be used for up to 1, 5, or continuing, and it can be used for building improvements. So similar to what we were talking about with the facility repair plan, right? And that can be continuing or for a timed thing, and it's a fixed millage rate. So next slide. Good teamwork back there. So this is what we have right now. So we have inside millage, which every school district has, and I think it's 10 mills, but it's split out amongst other county factors, right? So our version of that's 4.19, and that's continuing. We have various current expenses that were all lumped in together, and that totals of 41 mills, and those are continuing for operating expenses. We have our bond levy that helps fund our facility master plan. That will end, and we'll stop collecting and stop paying. Well, the debt will be done in 2031, 32 year, I think, far off into the future. And then there's the three emergency levies that I talked to earlier, and so those are all used for operating expenses. And so next slide. So let's go back to that, and then just pause for questions, and then we'll go back to that last slide. So do we have any questions from the audience or from Ms. Bolton? You want to make anybody, did I miss anything? Kevin or Mike, you want to add anything? Okay.
I would ask about that on the permanent improvement. You mentioned facilities, but there's other things that permanent improvement can be used for, if I remember correctly.
So anything that has a life of more than 5 years. So textbook adoptions, technology, upgrades, buses, vehicles. Thank you, Mike. He's doing the visual.
Were you driving a car, Mike?
Yeah, yeah.
It's a bigger wheel.
Right, or the 9-passenger vans could be 5-year,
Yes,
so yeah. So it just depends on, you have to kind of figure out what your plan is, and then, determine what the life cycle you want. Do you want it to be a 5-year levy? Do you want it to be continuing? So you're always going to have building maintenance, right?
Sure.
So the facility master plan required us to set aside $3.2 million, $3.3 million a year to do the day-to-day kind of repairs, buy filters and repair plumbing and that kind of stuff. But some of our newest, our first buildings that were in the facility master plan are now 20 years old, and they need roofs now and chillers replaced and boilers replaced. And so we just can't carve out enough money out of our operating expenses to make those big payments. And so the estimate, they went and did an inventory of what all the repairs needed to happen throughout all 66 buildings, and came up with it's about $32 million expense a year over a 5-year period. So an option could be to do a 5-year levy, permanent improvement levy, but then at the end of 5 years, you're going to be turning around and having more repairs. So, but one of the reasons we wanted to talk about this tonight was because we are in a situation where our growth, economy, and funding changes, in addition to our facility needs, is going beyond our ability to fund what we have without new money. So we wanted to start introducing the idea of possible, we could change the next renewal that's coming up to make it a bigger levy, a bigger dollar levy to help fund some of this. You could do a permanent improvement levy, you could do a bond levy. So these are just starting the conversation so we can start educating people and start our planning process.
Yes, I think that's critical to start the planning process. I would also say one of the other issues, as you mentioned as you were speaking, is that we went beyond our means when we had particular initiatives and when we had the previous strategic plan.
Right.
And so one of the things that is confusing internally and with the community is that we have a new strategic plan and we're not increasing necessarily the amount of money to fund it.
Right.
And so that's why it begins to be very important to understand how we do business and where we need to make particular cuts or spend our best dollars, not just our least dollars, but our best dollars. So I think that's been a confusing point for folks internally and in the community, because you do want to invest in strategic plans. So trying to find another way to make that investment happen that is not necessarily financial, but instead in re-envisioning and reinventing and rethinking things that haven't changed for a number of years. But we've got it, because of your leadership, we've got a tremendous record, having been out on the campaign trail, where there was 8 years and then another 8 years before we were asking for new money. And very few urbans, very few school districts can say that. So but we're at a turning point, and so it's great to start to get the input from the community.
Yeah, so we've been talking a lot about that during the budget roundtables about, I was asked last night, we had our first community roundtable last night, and I was asked, well, how can we increase our income? And what can we do to increase the income? And one response was, well, and grow your enrollment. But in the state funding formula, we're only getting 42 cents on the dollar. So every new enrollment sometimes makes it harder because you don't get enough to pay for that one child, that one new child. So we have to be creative, and we have to spend money on the things that are driving our student outcomes based on the goals and guardrails from the board, and stop doing things that aren't working as well or not at all because we're doing it out of habit. And so we simply have to change the way we do business in order to stay within our financial means. So do we have questions?
Yeah, the one is there a limit to the amount of money the district can levy?
Were you going to take that one, or was I me? Okay. So the limit, so no, but in terms of the ask, but it's always a balance between how much do you ask for, what do you think the voters are going to approve? And so there's always this mental science that says don't go over a, don't go over a 10, don't make it a 2-digit levy, like a 10 mil levy. And then there's something magical about the numbers of 8. And I don't remember what that was. I learned that years ago, and I don't remember the logic behind it. But so there's no limit on the ask. It's just whether you're willing to risk a defeat because you asked for too much. Good question.
The next question is, how do TIFs affect tax money coming into the district?
Okay. That one I'm going to throw over to our assistant treasurer, Michael. He needs to, yeah.
Thank you. So just so everyone knows, so TIF stands for tax increment financing. And it's an economic development tool that cities and municipalities use to fund basically improvement projects. So they create a TIF district, carve out those properties. We still get the original tax value of those properties, but the difference, the increment in growth, goes into a special fund for those TIFs. They use it for a lot of improvements like turning lanes, sidewalks, parking garages, that sort of stuff. In those agreements, and we do get payments. We get payments twice a year from those entities, where they do a calculation to make us whole. So the district still gets the money they should have gotten.
So Kevin, do you remember how much we get annually in the TIF? Like 23 million?
I was going to say.
Yeah.
So we just did this in last month's finance committee. I think.
Right.
I think the CRA number is higher, like 24 million, and TIFs I want to say is about 10, 12.
Okay.
Off the top of my head.
So if you want to know the amount, go look on our website under board, and there's a report that was done through finance committee last month. So good question.
The next question is, why are there, the difference between, why is there, it's called an emergency levy, and what's the difference between a levy and a bond?
You want to take that one?
Tell me the question one more time, sorry.
The difference between, why is it called an emergency levy, and what's the difference between a levy and a bond?
So, difference between an emergency and a current, there's actually some wonky language that goes with it. But the emergency is not subject to the reduction factors is one of the wonky things that applies to those. They're usually a shorter term. The current expenses are usually continuous. But it is a term that they use. I know it implies that there's an emergency, a fiscal emergency, and that's not what the actual implication of it is.
It's actually a state-defined term.
Yeah, it's the way they've established it. In terms of bond levies, typically a bond levy is the voters approve the levy, and then debt is issued that is then repaid through that tax money. And we do have that with the facility master plan program. There are other types of, where you levy the money and you don't have to go out and issue debt.
Right, so a levy would be an annual revenue collection that you don't have to pay back. And a bond levy, you get a lump sum up front, and then you have to pay that money back. So we used the bond levy to fund the facility master plan. So it was like a 30-year payback. But we got the money up front, and then we were able to invest some of that money to obtain interest earnings off of that.
This one is, I am a homeowner in the district as well as an employee. So as a taxpayer, it is getting more difficult. Will there be cuts to the administration levels? We're going to get more into the budget versus the levy and the bond.
So during the budget roundtables, we've said that everything's up for grabs in the budget, and to balance the budget, we have to just rethink the way we're doing it. So I imagine that there'll probably be some administrative costs that are cut, but I would highly encourage whoever that is to go to one of the roundtables, because they have a lot of information, and it shows you that even if you cut the entire central office, you wouldn't close the gap.
The next one is, if my house is valued at $100,000, how much do I pay in taxes to the district?
A great question. Were you going to answer that one?
I think we actually have a slide for that. I was going to actually talk about millage though, because I think there's some confusion there. So when you look at your taxes, every property has an assessed value, right? Right now it's 35% of the market value. And levies are done on mill basis. So a mill is 1/1000th of your assessed value. So if you have, I just did some quick math before you get in, if you have a $200,000 house, 1 mill is about $70,000, and then, 35% of that $70,000, and 1 mill is about $70.
Oh yeah, you say your market value is 200,000, but your assessed taxable value is 35% of that. And then you divide that by 1,000 to get your mill. It's a 1 mill cost. So if you'll flip to that next slide. Here we're trying to show you a copy of a tax bill that anybody can access, and you can follow the Hamilton County. We'll click on that in just a second. But if you go to that website and you pull up your address, and you go to the tax distribution page, it shows you how much of each of the taxing entities. I think there's 12 or 13 taxing entities. You know, we're the blue portion, so we're the largest portion, but we're not all of it. And it actually shows you your market value, your assessed value at the top, and then your total tax, but then what's reduced. So the reduction factor that pulls it back out of inflation. If you have the homeowners or credit or owner occupied credit, and then it shows you the half. But right there in the middle, you can see like a little blue box that says calculate. So this is where you can actually play. So if you're thinking about doing an improvement to your house and you want to know, well, I have a $100,000 house, I want to do a $200,000 improvement, you type in $300,000 and calculate, it'll show you what your taxes would be, your new taxes would be. So I just thought that was a really helpful tool. So if you want to click on that link, it'll show you, if you go to the Hamilton County, that link there, shows you the main website. And if you click on that first, on the left-hand side where it says property search, click on that. You just put in your address and that information comes up for you. And so we just did a snippet. I hid the name and the address of I just randomly picked somebody on some street. I don't remember what street I picked, just to show you how to do that. So did we answer your question about the $100,000? So $100,000 home, the assessed value is $35,000. 1 mil would be $35, right? 35,000 divided by 1,000, yeah, $35. So you multiply the number of mills times that 35, and that would be your tax bill for the year. And then you divide it half for a half year.
The 10 mills would be what?
3,500.
Three-
Did I do the math right?
$350.
$350, sorry.
Thank you.
I know, I can't do math in my head. I'm a professional accountant. I can't do math in my head, especially when you're on camera. So thank you for checking my math. I knew that didn't sound right. $350 for a $100,000 home for 10 mills.
I think in the example, what is the millage for this particular property? The full rate is 117 mil. The effective tax rate is 79 mil. And their total tax bill, the semi-annual is 1,400.
But just recall, that doesn't all go to the school district.
Correct.
We only have a portion of that. A big portion, but a portion of that.
I think we should try to explain why we have such a large portion of it.
Because the voters approved it?
Well,
And traditionally in the state of Ohio,
Yes, thank you.
a lot of the taxes are, the burden for supporting the schools is on the local taxpayers.
yeah, this state is very, very different than almost every other state. And of course, it's also unconstitutional for 2 decades. But the dependence that we have makes us much more accountable to the community and to the taxpayers. But indeed, it's important to recognize that many of those other entities have less dependence and have, let's say, more defined purposes and missions than public schools. And I think, too, that something we need to keep in mind is that there is great tax fatigue right
Yes,
now
agreed.
for everybody. And in order for us to go back to the voters, they may have been very excited about preschool years ago and still are, but again, do you expand it? Do you ask for the same, as the treasurer mentioned? And then the other is, if we're looking for any new money, again, it's been 8 years and then another 8 years that we've asked new money, which is remarkable. You have to really prove to the voters that you are worthy of that. And right now, we're not in a position to be thinking in terms of permanent improvement for tomorrow, because we have to really assess how we've used our facilities and how we're spending our monies and what have you. So it takes a while to prepare not just the messaging,
Right.
or what we're talking about. It's to prove that you have done everything you possibly can. And that's to your point that you keep mentioning, we have to prove that we have figured out another way to do business. Same old is not going to get us new monies. And we have to be successful with the new approach that we might be using.
Right, so what we've seen through our experience through the pandemic was the needs of our students have changed since prior to the pandemic. And so we can't just keep layering on more resources, but we have to make different decisions. And that's one of the reasons why we kicked off the whole return on investment concept, where we're looking at where we spend our money and is it giving us the impact that we had asked for? Are we getting the best bang for our buck? And then using that money most wisely. And so that's not always a very popular conversation when decisions are made, but we simply can't continue to spend the way we spend and then add new spends because there just isn't enough cash to cover that. So good point, thank you. And you're right, thank you for bringing up local control. So in the state of Ohio, we have elected board members who make educational decisions on our behalf. And in order to have that local control over decisions of the district, we have to help fund that. And so the funding formula, the state funding formula, tries to allocate funds towards the students based on staffing formulas that they came up with and categorical spending, and that's weighted spending for individual student needs. But it's also reduced by the wealth of the district. So they consider the school districts that have more property wealth than others have the ability to raise more local funds than others. And so for Cincinnati, we receive 42 cents on the dollar in the formula, so our local taxpayers have to make up the difference, as opposed to a Cleveland who has less property wealth, same types of students, about the same number of students and the same economic needs, but they receive about 73%, or the last time I looked, they got 73% of their state share, while we get 42. And so it feels a little unfair, but it's better than the former formula that we had. So we're moving in the right direction. More questions from the audience?
So when you said that CPS is forecasting a budget deficit if we maintain our spending levels at the same as past years, and that these budget roundtable discussions are to categorize some of the spending options, where does new monies come from besides their levies? If the community, as you said, the state has a certain set number that they can give us, but the community is asking us to maintain or add additional resources, how are we going to fund those additional resources?
So that's an excellent question. And that came up at the last night's meeting. So, we can't do, we wouldn't bingo enough or, that kind of stuff to raise money to help with that situation. But, there's grants out there, and I caution people on using grants because they're usually time bound. And most people want to use grants to help buy people. And when the grants end, they never want to let the people go. And so they hit the general fund, and that causes more stress on us. So, so they call it soft money. So state and federal grants should be used for shorter term projects or implementation kinds of projects where you don't need ongoing recurring costs. That's what we're seeing with ESSER, right? We have recurring costs in ESSER. We have this big cliff coming, and we got to figure out what to do about it. So we can sell property. We have some, we can consolidate schools, underutilized schools, sell property. But that, again, is a short-term financing because you can only spend that money once. So, we can establish, somebody asked me about, do we have an educational foundation? And we do not. We've talked about it over the years. But that might be an option for more recurring support. And you can designate, almost in a church, you can designate it for this project or that project. So
I would add, if you would, about COPS as a possibility.
COPS, so COPS stands for the Certificate of Participation, and it is a financing tool. It's not new revenue. It's a borrowing, but it doesn't go towards our debt limitations. So the district can only borrow so much compared to the relative value of all of our assessed property, $7.6 billion, I think. And then the debt limitations less than 10%. And because of our facility master plan, are pretty close to that ceiling. So, but the certificate of participation acts like a capital lease, and so, or an operating lease with collateral. So you basically collateralize. If we were going to do, like for example, we bought Gamble Montessori, we bought the Mercy Building to build Gamble and to improve cans, and we borrowed $22 million under a COPS. But you have to make room in your operating budget to make that annual lease payment. So you borrowed $22 million, but we had to make room for $1.5 million of payment each year. So, and that's also time bound. The IRS is very strict about spending it in a time frame and making sure it's all spent. And it's highly, highly regulated. But so it's an option to help with short-term projects, but not long-term operations.
And we do have some immediate facility issues, rather than even talking in terms of the 5-year plan regarding facilities maintenance and updating. I mean, that we have some immediate issues. And one of the immediate issues I think we have, and I think the board agrees, is that we need a third Montessori high school. And can we wait 3 years, 4 years for that if we are indeed turning away people from the Montessori program? So there's some immediate, there's some other schools, and some of our buildings are over-enrolled. And indeed, we need to find, not just build a building, but a way we assign students and what have you to immediately address those issues. Because you're going to have to immediately address those issues and try to show that you have a solution before you go out to the public and ask for this much larger amount for both the maintenance piece and the update piece, but also to continue the growth. So there's some very challenging opportunities in the next many months.
Agreed. More questions? Checking time. Wow. So I know Dr. Moffat is online. I can't imagine she doesn't have any questions. So Dr. Moffat, would you like to ask some questions? And by President Craig. Thank you. No? Okay. So that was the end of our slides. We try to keep our slides really short so that we have an opportunity to talk more about responding to questions and getting feedback from the community. I would still make a plug for the budget roundtables because we really do want community feedback when we're having to make some decisions about hold on to, you know, the level of nursing care that we provide, or, you know, do we keep the same staffing formulas for security? Oh, don't go off that last slide. It was an announcement for the next one. You'll get it back. Okay. Just tell me not to worry. So, so we really do want community feedback because there are some hard decisions and about what we have money, we have resources. We just need to determine what are our priorities on what we spend.
I think for us to have our experts kind of talk in terms of what our assets are, because we do spend so much time talking about we may have to cut this, we might have to cut that. To your point, whether it's selling property or assessing what we have, it would seem to me that kind of looking at things as an asset, like how do we improve our assets? How do we use our assets to the greatest benefit? And I'm not sure that we do that in the way as efficiently or as progressively as we need to.
Well, I know the ad hoc committee is looking at the utilization, over enrollment, under enrollment, and different grade configurations. So we're eagerly anticipating that report so that we can go out and do some feasibility studies and then cost them out. So, I mean, we have these beautiful buildings that we use, or that we built or repaired or reorganized for a facility master plan. I know they've talked about, you know, modifying some of the neighborhood boundaries to gain transportation help, maybe changing some of the transportation policies to help reduce costs, because our transportation costs have really skyrocketed since 2008. Our general operating budget for transportation was about $22 million, and it's up to 51 now. So it's a lot of inflation, but it's also a lot of costs that associated with choice and with the voucher in the communities, the birth of community schools and voucher program. And so with all that choice in the district, it drove costs up because you can't be as efficient when you have all those different routes. But they're working hard on the efficiency of transportation. But we have to find a way to reduce that cost. You know, we go above and beyond state regulations or state requirements, right? It's the state requires 2 miles for elementary students, and we're at 1.125 mile, I believe.
Mhm.
And 9 to 12, that we're not required to provide transportation, but we choose to because it helps our academics when we can get the students to school.
It helps our academics. It also helps the growth plan. The recent article that you shared from Fordham, and Fordham is a very conservative educational research group. And the very first chart, the major concept was, you know, shut down lower performing or under-enrolled schools was their theme. But the very first chart that they showed in the article was a number of the school districts across the state that we would consider our peers.
The urbans, yeah.
We are the only school district on that rather lengthy chart that actually showed growth.
Right.
Every one of the others were down, because that's the other thing. The facilities master plan, a generation earlier than most school districts did it, and did it basically all at once, whether it was, as you said, mostly locally funded. They're terribly locally funded.
Yeah, I think
$1.2 billion and 70-some%, I think, was local, which is rare in
Yeah.
the state.
you're right. It was 29% was funded by the state.
Unbelievable.
Yeah.
The burden that our taxpayers have already had. But again, you have a completely rebuilt school system.
Well, what we've seen is a lot of population shift because we have 54, I believe, distinct neighborhoods. And so when we started the facility master plan at the very onset, over several years, we closed about 13, 14 buildings. And we had to sell them off. And so then now, as we're regrowing, we're having to buy them back. And so, and then, you know, of course, they haven't been renovated like ours were. So now we're having to spend money to fix them up. And so you're right, that article did show that we are the only district in the state of Ohio in the urbans that has grown enrollment. Some have dropped significantly, Dayton being one of them, I believe. So, yes, we have a lot of challenge. Something you said sparked something, but now I can't remember it because I was trying not to think of something else. I was trying to listen to you.
Uh-oh. That's always dangerous.
So,
Just wait till you're as old as I am. That gets to be very critical. But no, I just think we really have to emphasize that the approach of growth rather than shrinking. We made a determination during the facilities master plan that we were making all those decisions, but we were making those decisions in the belief that if we did the right things and we offered the right product, that we would again grow. And we did. I can remember we kept having to, my 16 years, first several years, lower enrollment, swing space, all kinds of stuff, buildings not quite done, what have you. And then we plateaued that loss and then started to have a rise and had tremendous growth until we had COVID. But now even post-COVID, we're back into the swing of things, not the same percentage of growth, but with the capacity. And I think that's a strategy that does separate us from almost certainly other urbans, except maybe Toledo kind of has that approach about growth right now as a way for an urban to succeed.
So the challenge is our growth is mostly, or the biggest part of growth is at the preschool level, which is not funded by the state. And so the local, and we use a lot of federal grants, state and federal grants to help support early childhood, in addition to collecting tuition from families who can afford it. So eventually that's going to, when those kindergartners become, or I'm sorry, when those preschoolers become kindergartners, and as that bubble of growth goes through, our enrollment will continue to go up. But we really want to market and welcome all of our students back to the district. We have some incredible academic programs, and academically we continue to improve. graduation rates are continuing to go in the right direction. And we have a strategic plan to help us get there. And all the early indicators show that we're still heading in the right direction. So the schedule in front of you are these the roundtables? Yes. So we've had several already. We've had some good feedback from people. They thought it was very engaging, very enlightening, very informative. It's a lot of information. I will warn you. We're being as transparent as we possibly can, which is almost information overload. And then there's like a little brain exercise that they do. And then at the end, we ask for a survey to get feedback on where your preferences might be on where spending initiatives or investments should be, or reductions. And so the first community one was last night. I was there. There's another one for district staff on the 30th. Another one on December 1st for the community, and that one's going to be virtual. And then there's two more opportunities, December 6th and December 13th, January 3rd. And I saw an email today where they're trying to add 3 or 4 more that are at school sites. And so look for those announcements as soon as they finalize those dates and locations. They will announce and put them on the website. So.
Yep, and the surveys are anonymous. Just want to remind everybody.
Yes, the surveys are anonymous, so we can't, we won't see any emails or anything like that. We're just interested in the information.
We did have two other questions. One, probably just to provide clarification, they asked that bring back the bus routes. I'm assuming they're speaking of the dedicated metro routes, which can't be provided due to their federal funding is one of the rationales. You might want to provide some commentary on that just to clarify it for our listener.
I'd speak to that. Right now, we're not part of, and haven't been now for 3 years in a row, part of the Metro sort of business plan, period, over and done with. I do think that there is a concern about why it is that our transportation costs are so great when indeed we have, for all intents and purposes, have reduced services, if you will, for our high school folks, because they had dedicated routes, and Metro is cheaper for us to use in the way that we're using it than the dedicated routes were. So that increase in transportation costs is challenging. The other thing I've heard, I'm hearing this in the communities, particularly where our high schools are located, that maybe they sort of Metro can't afford what we once did with the dedicated or extra routes, as they were called. But at least at dismissal, there is a growing sense in our neighborhoods that at dismissal, they want to find a way to have access for the students to have an end of school day and they're gone. Because what's happening in a number of our neighborhoods, especially where there's a business district or there's traffic or what have you, even residential, the fact that our teenagers are lingering, or that they are waiting at school, which is causing our staff to stay later or be later or do more after the bell has sounded. So I think there might be a growing sense that we need to address dismissal more so than arrival, and maybe there's some kind of compromise there because Metro is expanding itself in other areas. Maybe we just need to make sure our teenagers are in our neighborhoods or have a higher priority, at least for dismissal. So that's something I'm hearing.
The next question is, do businesses pay the same property taxes to the district levies as homeowners? Maybe just provide a little bit of clarification difference between property taxes for businesses versus homeowners.
So
And
the effective rates, even for individual levies, is different for commercial, industrial versus residential, agricultural. So, for instance, when you add all the current expense levies together, the effective rate of those for residential is 20 mil, but for commercial, industrial, it's 29.3 mil, and that's after reduction factors.
So the businesses are paying a greater portion, commercial properties are paying a greater portion than residential.
Yeah.
That's a great question, though. No, I've never been asked that. Anything else? Okay, so just want to remind everybody, we're not going to have a financial town hall in December to honor everybody's holiday activities and evening challenges, but we will be returning on January 24th, where we're going to be giving a ESSER update. So where we stand, this is our last year of ESSER. All expenses have to be incurred by June 30th, and the bill has to be paid by September 30th in order to send that money back. And I know that we have a lot of this money is tied up in some of our facility projects. There's 3 facility projects that we're using these funds with. One of them is supposed to be done in June, the other in August, and the one in September. The one in September I'm nervous about because I want to make sure that all the funds are encumbered by June, which we think they already are because under the contracts. But paying out those final bills, and because we're heading into winter and things might get delayed, we're just a little bit nervous about that. So we're hoping there'll be a little bit of a waiver on some of that timing. But we're monitoring it, and we will be presenting all the data on January 24th. We're looking at any underspending, any positions that were budgeted that haven't been filled. We want to repurpose those funds and get them spent out so that we don't have to send any money back. So hope you will join us on June 24th for an ESSER update. I think the superintendent's going to be joining us on that one, and so she'll be one of our guest speakers. And any closing comments?
I'm just anxious to know about the 3 facilities that you mentioned, because
Well, I don't remember what order they're in, but it was Hyde Park, Pleasant Ridge, and with the Walnut Hills, the cafe. So Walnut Hills is first. I don't remember which one, Hyde Park or Pleasant Ridge, is what order they're in.
you won't be surprised to know that I think there's a 4th facility that has
That's in
ESSER
there
money.
too. Yes, that's in there too.
That's the Rawson Farmhouse. Thank you.
It's still in there. I don't know where it is in that,
I know
but
the
so
money is allotted.
and maybe
so-
we'll invite Mr. Chris Burkhardt, our Chief Operating Officer, to the ESSER Town Hall so he can answer some of those questions.
I think that would be a good idea
Yeah.
because we've now gone through 5 different boards with that in mind.
It's been a long haul dealing with ESSER, let me tell you. So, any other questions? Okay, are we allowed to end a little bit early? Okay. Yeah. Oh, so 8 minutes early, everybody back. So thank you all. Thank you, Mike and Kevin, for staying late, my resident experts, and joining us on stage. Thank you, Ms. Bolton, for always being a great financial supporter of the district.
Absolutely. My pleasure. Thank you.
And good night, everybody.